Welcome to Cerebral Women in Paris Art Talks podcast. I'm Phyllis Hollis, your host. Years ago, after hearing an artist say art will save us, my intellectual curiosity was sparked, and I began a journey to understand exactly how. Through conversations with visual artists and the professionals who support them, I explore how art helps us see our history, our culture, our lives, and the experience of others in ways no other medium can. Capturing these voices is essential. They remind us of the power of art and the importance of noticing life's simple beauty. And now, here in Paris, a city that has long welcomed the daring, the dreamers, and the defiant, I continue these conversations where art breathes, questions, and reminds us that creation itself is an act of liberation. Welcome and enjoy Cerebral Women in Paris. This episode features Bisa Butler. She lives and works in New Jersey. Through her dynamic, celebratory quilted portraits of people of African descent, Bisa investigates the purposes and potential of portraiture within the Black historical narrative. Her influences range widely from personal family scrapbooks to American folk traditions and AfriCOBRA philosophies. Although her finished works are made entirely of textiles, Bisa approaches the medium from a painterly perspective. Sourcing imagery mainly from photographs, she uses layered fabrics and quilting to create unique compositions, psychological depth, and detailed textures that she found missing from her paintings. By returning to textiles, Bisa has reconnected with her family's history, since it was her grandmother and mother who taught her to sew. Bisa earned her BFA in painting at Howard University and holds a MAT in teaching art from Montclair State University in New Jersey. She was named an honorary doctorate of letters from Bloomfield College. Her work has been exhibited widely, both domestically and internationally. In 2020, she had her first institutional solo exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work can be found in the permanent collections of the Art Institute of Chicago, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, to name a very few. Since 2023, Bisa has had successful and sold-out exhibitions working with Jeffrey Deitch, both in New York City and Los Angeles, California. Enjoy this episode featuring Bisa Butler, an artist who creates quilted portraits, and visit cerebralwomen.com for additional information. Thank you and enjoy. Bisa, welcome to Cerebral Women Art Talks in Paris.
Thank you for having me.
When did you discover your artistic passion? When did it come to you that this was your path?
I never not felt like an artist. I was born in the midst of the 70s to a very progressive mother. My mother had grew up overseas. Her father was a diplomat to Morocco, a Black American diplomat raising a family in Africa in the 50s. And that went into the 60s. So she grew up in this bohemian tribe of international children, expats and diplomats. And then my father was and is a man born in Ghana and very Catholic and went to Catholic school all his life. So he was then straight-laced and still is. But he was working all day like most dads in the 70s. So my mother was with us kids and exposed us to everything and nothing in the best way, like laying in the grass, looking up at the clouds, and the activity is deciding what you think that cloud looks like. And she really nurtured and fostered exploration, imaginative play, storytelling, and her telling us about her life was like the literal Arabian tales. Like, we're ordinary New Jersey kids, but we're growing up with these tales of life in Africa in the 50s and the 60s with her father and siblings and my grandmother. So my mother enrolled us in a school called the Children Under the Rainbow, which is exactly what it sounds like. Whatever you picture when I say that, they're all little blacks and browns and everything in between. Gay parents, non-gender conforming parents. In the 70s, in a collective in this Victorian home where the philosophy was like, it was influenced definitely by Montessori, but Montessori times 100. And their whole philosophy was like, let the children lead. They had classrooms with teachers stationed in them, but the children decided when and where they would go to which classroom. So I started Rainbow School around 4 years old. And if I wanted to spend the whole day in the art room, I could. My sister wanted to spend the whole day in the math room. She did. And my brother, I was 4 and my brother was 10 or 11. He spent all day outside with like the explorers crew where they would like get acorns and then come back inside and make acorn bread, and they would like build things. But he was a lot more hands-on type of child. But even before then, it was just established that Bisa was the artist in the family. I was the artist. And at Rainbow School, I was respected as an artist. And since then, I've always felt that way.
What type of art were you influenced by? Or was there an artist that you were influenced by when you were really young?
When I was really young, I had an aunt, one of my favorite aunts, my Aunt Lydia. She moved to Paris as a young woman to be a fashion photographer. That was the kind of person she was. After she finished undergrad, she told her parents she was off to Paris, and off she went. And she worked with designers like Claude Montana. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh, yes, yes.
He passed, I think, last year, something recently. I didn't realize that he had a long life. I was happy to hear that. But I remember that she had so many sample clothings and shoes. So my mother took us to see my Aunt Lydia, and we were staying with her in her apartment in Paris. We were in France for about a month. And they took us all around. And I remember being so enraptured by this sculpture. I have a photo of it. So now I got to figure out, where is this sculpture? But it was a fountain sculpture. And I stood in front of it. And I have pictures of myself there because my aunt was so fascinated that, why does this little girl want to stand here and look at this sculpture? So that was my first experience with seeing a piece of art that I thought was really beautiful. And my Aunt Lydia was one of my big inspirations for like, what does an artist's life look like?
How do you define your practice?
I call myself an artist who makes quilted portraits because I really love all art. I love to draw, I love to paint, I love sculpture. I think creative energy can go wherever you want. I like to write. I wouldn't say my writing is good, but I like writing. I even like singing, even though I don't have a good voice. But I think creative energy is this driving force within us. And you can put it wherever you want. So that's why I like to say I make quilted portraits instead of saying I'm a fiber artist or I'm a quilt artist, because it's too small.
What are the materials?
The materials that I work with are really related to my childhood because my mother was one of 10 and there were 7 girls and 3 boys. My grandmother had 7 girls first and then the 3 boys last, which they had the nerve to call the 3 jewels.
Of course.
Can you imagine 7 girls and then 3 boys in a row? They were mama's crown jewels. So they're in Morocco, and my grandfather came from humble beginnings. He was a man born in Nova Scotia, and he was smart, worked hard, and studied. And in his lifetime, graduate opportunities weren't prevalent here in the States, as you know. He went to Belgium for grad school, and that just set off a life of being interested in the world around him. So then that put him in line when he got his position in Morocco. He was U.S. emissary. who, when I was in Paris, you remember, I met the new U.S. emissary to Morocco. And I was like, oh my God, like, you are the new version. Like, this is crazy. Of all people, I've just, end up having dinner with. And my grandfather was also co-stationed in Ethiopia. And basically, he worked with USIA. I don't even think it exists anymore, but it was like American Propaganda Bureau. Like, make America look good to foreign people, make us seem like a friendly nation. And what better way to introduce the American is this black man, tall black man with many children. He speaks French. He's traveled all over the world. So he was very likable. So he was the type of person, if you want to get in good in Africa, you're going to put somebody who looks, talks, and walks like them and even thinks like them. And my grandmother and all the girls needed to look appropriate. They're around all these diplomats. They're a family of 10. They're not a well-off family. So Yves Saint Laurent, Christian Dior, all of the French designers that you could see in French magazines living in Morocco became the standard of the clothing that they would want. And they would all sew. So my grandmother would get the Vogue magazine, Vogue patterns, and maybe it's a Christian Dior dress, but they're going to make 7 Christian Dior dresses. And fabric was cheaper in those days, especially on the continent, still is, but they were really invested in high quality fabrics because of the way it falls on the body. So gabardine, chiffon, silk blends, the difference between silk, polyester, and cotton, just all of these things, the weight of the fabric, the grain of the fabric, everything was so important. And when I started grad school and wanted to make a quilted portrait for my grandmother, I asked her for her remnants. And then my mother got excited, all my aunts. So they were giving me their fabric remnants, which were all designer fabric remnants. They weren't quilters, so the fabric they gave me were the chiffons and the laces and the gabardines. By this time, it was the 80s, so they were like making Halston silk dresses to go out with in the 70s with their friends. And so, or the parachute pants of the 80s, like those were the remnant fabrics that I had. And then also Afrocentrism was new again, because it was the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. But now we're getting into the 80s where people were starting to do styles more influenced by hip hop, like Salt and Pepper with the kente caps, or having like, my mother would make a denim jacket and then make kente like epaulets for the shoulders. So I got all her remnants, and those were the fabrics that I used to make my first portraits. And me not coming from a quilting background, I didn't know that there were quilting rules. Like quilts were supposed to be durable, it's supposed to be for your bed, you're supposed to keep warm, you're supposed to be able to wash it many times. And you're also mostly, well, for our community, mostly using fabrics that have already been worn. I didn't understand that. So I had all these fine fabrics, and I'm making portraits for the wall because I'm coming from a fine art background. I went to Howard for fine art, for painting. So my materials to this day are still fine dressmakers' fabrics. And when you see my quilts, the layering that I'm using, I layer upon layer upon layer thin fabrics like chiffon and tulle and netting, but fabrics that you can see through that have a translucence, because I'm trying to achieve the transparency that I would have as if I was painting. And if you're painting with acrylics or oils, you can add some glazes in there. You can add linseed oil, but you can thin your paint and make it more transparent. Or if you're painting with watercolor, you can just add water, and make it thinner. If you want to make your paint thicker, you can add some sort of gel medium. But with fabric, I have to find fabric that exists already. If I want a thinner version of red, then I have to go on a hunt, go to Mood Fabrics and find the most thinnest, lightest, like papery red fabric that I can. And those end up usually being very, very expensive, but they're beautiful. So, yeah, I'm still using the fabrics that I was surrounded by my mother making clothing with.
Did you ever consider painting?
I did. I thought, like most kids do, in high school, you're going to be an artist. What does that mean? It means you have a beret, a striped shirt. You are going to have a canvas by the river, the Seine, and you're going to paint the boats going by. Like, that's what I thought being an artist was. And so I went to Howard and they asked me, what's your major? And I was like, painting. I didn't know. Like, how can you know? How much do you even paint in high school? And I had never experienced using fabric as an art making material. I had been making doll clothes and my own clothes because I wanted to look good. I didn't associate fibers, fabrics, and looking good with artistic creation. Well, I started Howard actually in the School of Architecture, and that was a disaster. After 1 year, I switched to fine art, and that is where I came into contact with Jeff Donaldson, who was the founder of AfriCOBRA, and Wadsworth Jarrow, who also was a member of AfriCOBRA, this young Black revolutionary group of artists who came out of the South Side of Chicago, who were determined to become the artistic arm of the Black Power movement. And they wanted to define a Black aesthetic. And they did define, they had a whole manifesto. This was no fly by night, nothing. Like, they studied in Europe and in Africa. These young, brilliant artists came together and put together their list of demands, but demands to themselves and the community. Like, what are we going to do to help our people? There was a show, I don't want to misquote where it was, but it was an AfriCOBRA show, and it was called 10 in Search of a Nation. So they were really focused on African American liberation and how art can be a tool to help that happen. And we see that now, the propaganda machine is insane, but it's also an awareness of how powerful imagery is, how powerful what you see affects how you think. And by me graduating from Howard School of Fine Art, I learned the techniques for painting. I learned about color mixing and blending and what color can do to influence. I learned about composition and design and how to put together a piece of artwork. And they were very focused on making sure we knew about AfriCOBRA, we knew about the African aesthetic in art from the continent, but also separate from that, the African American aesthetic. Like, what is it that we, as people of the descendants of chattel slavery, what is it that we owe to our people? What do we need to do? And that was very much drummed into us. I don't know if any of my classmates could escape without that burden upon them. I don't imagine they could, because our professors, it was really common to be like, oh, well, when I was at school, so here on the West Coast, Jacob Lawrence was my professor. Like, this is how they spoke. They would be like, well, Charles White or Elizabeth Catlett or Lois Jones. All of those Black legends were professors. And now I'm in the classroom with the students of those people. So the expectation was insane. It was so extreme. Like, if your professor was Aaron Douglas, and these guys were not easy men. Like, when you read their books and you read their writings, or you read or hear from other people what Romare Biernan, how he critiqued their work, Oh man. I mean, Romare Bearden is one of my favorite artists, but the critique he gave to Faith Ringgold, who was my idol of all idols, was like kind of soul destroying. So I grew up and I went through school with very tough, revolutionary minded professors. And even though I don't paint, the burden and the mantle that was passed on to me was drummed in from the very start. Like, you're standing on our shoulders and you have a duty. There was no way you could live in Washington, D.C. in the 90s, pre gentrification Washington, D.C., and not see that the Black community was suffering. This was at the tail end of the crack epidemic, and Black neighborhoods had been deliberately flooded with heroin and crack, and you had to step over people to like enter the metro station. And it would be the same people every day, and those people would look just like you and me. So there's no way you could convince yourself that you weren't walking in privilege and that your people didn't need you.
Is your work connected? Each individual piece, is there a connection there based on this experience at Howard?
Yes, it is, because it's not that I look at look at a subject, let's say, or a photograph, and I'm like, yes, this is going to help further the revolution. But I'm thinking of what is attractive to me are Black people who look whole, hearty, and hale. And they make me feel good. You know, when I see a photograph of a lovely young woman who has a natural grace and beauty about her, and her eyes are shining, dark eyes are shining. That's something that speaks to me because it reminds me of my aunts, all those 6 lovely women who I grew up looking so glamorous and beautiful. When I see a Gordon Parks photo of a father reading to his daughter, I think of my father who read to us. So my artwork now began as a reflection of family. My very first piece was a gift for my grandmother, and it was her wedding portrait. And then I made a portrait of my grandfather, who I had never met. On my father's side, I wanted to give him something. And I didn't have a photo of this grandfather, so I wanted to make an image that he could look at. My very first image makings were gifts to family and images of people or moments that made them feel good and happy.
So in general, when you're working, are you thinking about who your audience is, or are you thinking about how people feel when they look at your work?
I think the audience that I'm thinking about is the person in the photo. I'm thinking about the person in the photo, and I guess that was because the first one was for my grandmother, and it was her as a younger woman. And I had already made a painting of my grandmother, and she outright told me that I made her look old and she didn't like it. So it wasn't like I was guessing, like, maybe she'll like this. She's going to tell me. And that was her wedding photo that sat on her dresser. And I was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do now. I know, I got it. She loves this photo. Because that gave me such a sense of completeness. When she saw that quilt, she was so happy. My grandmother had everything a woman could have by the time she was in her late 80s. There was nothing I could give her. There was no perfume bottle that she hadn't already smelled or had, no silk scarf, no comfy shoes. Like, she had 10 children who were all adults and really showered her with affection. So I wanted to do something for her to let her know how much I cared about her. And when I gave her the portrait, she was so happy. She was bedridden at that time, and she had the quilt, which wasn't that big. It was about the size of like a poster, like a wall poster. She had it wrapped in tissue paper across her legs. And when anybody came over to visit her, she would unwrap the tissue paper and show them the portrait. And that was the first portrait I ever made. So to this day, when I see a portrait or a photo that I think, oh gosh, I really want to quilt that, I'm really thinking about the person in it. I hope they're okay with this. I hope they like it. And I'm really paying close attention to how I'm portraying them. If they were to see it, would they be okay with it? And then it has happened to me a couple times that family members have contacted me and said, that is my grandmother, that is my dad in that photo, and it was taken here on this date. And that also gives that sense of like, I feel like it's a nod from ancestors and from the Almighty, like you are doing a right thing, a good thing.
Do you feel Black art can be defined?
Probably not. Black American art, I like the way the AfriCOBRA group put together a standard of what they wanted because their philosophy more had like a purpose. Like they weren't really like it should look like this, but they were like it should do these things. So I like it in that way. But me being a child of Ghana by way of my father, I'm aware of the 54 countries in Africa and how very different they are. Ethiopia and Morocco, two very different places. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Gabon, South Africa. It's so vast, it's so huge that I wouldn't want to even, I don't even think it's possible. They say like we're genetically different from Black people in different places, sometimes more different than people who are the same race as we are. So to try to put a cap on it, but I like the idea of Black American art specifically having a specific purpose, especially because right now I feel that we are up against the ropes politically, and there are many challenges for the rights of Black Americans in this country. So we need all the help that we can get. But I wouldn't say I could define what is Black art in general. And then don't even let me get into this Southeast Asian, like Fijian and Polynesian and New Zealand and other Black people from places that are not connected to Africa.
What do you feel is the purpose of art?
When I think back to whatever I would know as the first art makings, or like the handprints in caves, or people carving animals and the flora, fauna around them, I think must have been a form of reflection. They must have been just thinking about their world. Maybe putting things out here visually helps us organize our thoughts, and I think it helps us feel better too, to see things around us, remember those early ones. Maybe they were reflecting on times where they saw big herds of animals, or it was a particularly abundant season, or maybe there was a hunt that was very, very successful. But those things help us feel good. I think it can have many meanings, but it seems to be very much a form of reflection.
Share with us, what are you excited about right now?
I have an upcoming show that will open in Washington, D.C. next spring. And this show has been in the works for 4 years. So I am super excited about that. It's a traveling museum show, mid-career survey. I'm very excited to be able to show my work in a big way again. The last art exhibit I had in a museum, a solo exhibition, closed in, what year was that? 2022? So it's been a long time. The country has changed a lot in this period of time. And I think that because my work is made in the sense as a balm and a reminder for us to feel good about ourselves, that I think it'll be good for us to look at.
When do the titles of your work enter the creative process?
The titles of my works originally began with me walking around my father's study. He has a small wood paneled study with bookshelves all around the room. And I grew up looking at the titles on the walls. Like I would see Julius Nyeri, Not Yet Uhuru. I would see I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, or I would see Giovanni's Room, James Baldwin. I didn't necessarily read all these books, but I grew up looking at these beautiful titles, The Warmth of Other Suns, like the poeticness, the poetic quality of book titles right there on the band, on the binding, were staring at me in my face my whole life. If I would go in my father's study and like talk to him about anything, there were all those titles. And so I went in his study. This is like 2001, and I was had made up my mind. I'm going to be a fine art quilter. And I had a pencil and paper, and I just wrote down the titles of books. And I was like, these are going to be the names of my artworks. And I really did use a lot of those titles, not all of them, though. And I believe that the title of an artwork is an opportunity for you to share something of your thought process with the viewer. I don't want to be too heavy handed and tell people what they should think when they look at my artwork. I can tell you what I thought behind it when I made it, but if what you think about it is completely different, that is 100,000% valid because it is sparking something in you. That's the whole purpose. But the title gives the viewer a clue. If I call a portrait a true likeness, you know some of what I'm thinking about. But if I leave it untitled, then I'm not really giving you anything. When artists, I don't think I've ever done an untitled. It's like such a wonderful opportunity. And I know some incredible writers. The poet Jasmine Mans, she is a poet here in New Jersey whose work I love. And I went to school with the children of Amiri Baraka. They were in my classes at Howard. So my best friend is the daughter of Richard Wesley, like an incredible playwright. And one of his plays, The Mighty Gents, I named two of my quotes off of his work. He wrote Uptown Saturday Night. So I named one of my quilts Southside Sunday Morning because it was a portrait of young children in Chicago on Easter morning. But I'm always giving nods to the writers because I love what they do. And I feel like they write better than me, so why should I come up with a title? They've already came up with better ones.
You were commenting on the poet.
Jasmine Mans?
Yes. Were you going to say her poems don't have titles, or were you going to say something like that?
Oh, I was just saying that she's this young, lovely, dynamic woman who very much just inspires me. She had a campaign during COVID that some people latched onto and some other influencers copied, but it was buy weed from women. And so she had these like canvas totes all around. It would say buy weed from women. And I'm not a smoker, but I love the feminist business mindset. And this is right before all of these legalized weed dispensaries were opened. And Jasmine was ahead of the game on that. I really love to give homage to people who write and people who think. So if I can put one last thing in there, like the title, and give a nod to something that I'm reading or being impressed by, I try to do that.
I've enjoyed this conversation very much. I have one more question. So how do you want your art to impact the way people think?
I hope that my artwork can work as an equalizer and a humanizing aspect to see the truth of the matter. So many misconceptions are out there about people of African descent, and it's so toxic right now, these misconceptions. They're literally killing people because they're thought of as less than human. They are thought of as people who don't have God, who don't have love, who don't deserve shelter. we have very powerful people saying that you want to blast some other people back to the Stone Ages, like evil sentiments. And I hope that my artwork can be on the good side to show you a true mirror that shows you that there's humanity everywhere, and every single person, life matters, including people's lives who've already ended. The memory of their life matters. What they did on this earth was important. And so I hope that if there's at least that when you look at my artwork, you realize this was a person and they matter just as much as I do.
I love that. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Phyllis.
Thank you for listening to Cerebral Women Art Talks podcast. For additional content, please visit cerebralwomen.com and be sure to follow Cerebral Women on Instagram.